5:27 a.m., Watson Island Marina, Miami, Florida. 22 charter fishing vessels sat dark and still in their berths, hull lights off, lines secured, salt air moving in off Biscayne Bay in the warm first hours of a May morning. On the main dock below the harbor master's shack, a figure in gray maintenance coveralls pushed a drum of deck varnish toward the nearest vessel at a measured, unhurried pace. He had been in position since 4:49 a.m. He was not a maintenance worker. 148 federal agents were 90 seconds from simultaneous movement across 4 separate target locations. The Castellano fleet had operated out of this marina since 2004. 22 registered vessels, FDA-inspected, CBP customs cleared on every commercial run for over 20 years. Sponsor of the annual Cuban American Sport Fishing Classic for 11 consecutive years. The family's permit and compliance file with the Port of Miami ran to over 1,000 pages. Roberto Castellano, the founder and patriarch, was 63 years old and known at every major tournament banquet from Bimini to Key West. He had built this operation from 3 boats and a dock lease into one of the most recognized charter businesses on the Miami waterfront. Not one record in that file reflected what was about to be discovered. In the minutes before dawn on May 14, 2026, Diplomatic Security Service and U.S. Customs and Border Protection were executing the largest coordinated maritime export control operation in South Florida's federal operational history. A 6-month investigation, financial surveillance across 4 shell company networks, intelligence coordination with the Defense Intelligence Agency, a target package built entirely on a single anomalous number flagged by one CBP inspector at Gate 7 of the Port of Miami on a November night 6 months earlier. 412 sets of U.S. specification, military night vision, and thermal optics hardware, bound for Cuba, moving through the oldest family-run fishing operation on the Miami waterfront. Only 7 federal agents knew the complete target package before the entry window opened. This is what happened. The chain to Watson Island Marina didn't start with a wiretap, a confidential informant, or undercover work. It started with arithmetic, November 11th, 2025. Port of Miami, container inspection dock, Gate 7, CBP container. Inspector Diana Reyes, 12 years with the agency, was running late shift manifest verification on an outbound commercial shipment flagged for secondary examination. The shipment moved under a Miami-registered exporter's license held by Castellano Marine Supplies, LLC, a subsidiary of the Castellano Charter Group. Destination, a fishing supply distributor operating out of Havana. Listed contents, spare reel handles, deck hardware, and bulk monofilament spools. Standard commercial fishing industry cargo. The kind of consignment that cleared the Port of Miami multiple times every week without incident. Reyes pulled the weight certification, 340 pounds over manifest. For plastic reel handles and lightweight monofilament, the weight didn't make sense. Monofilament is light. Reel handles are negligible. The total should match the parts. A 340-pound gap on a manifest wasn't a rounding error. It was a math problem. Reyes flagged it for a controlled physical examination. The examination team opened the top layer of cargo, standard fishing supply components, exactly as listed. They worked deeper through the consignment. In the 3rd row of monofilament spools, cylindrical, industrial, opaque plastic, factory sealed in shrink wrap, the weight was wrong. Not just heavy, precisely wrong in a way that suggested the interior had been engineered rather than packed. The spools had been hollowed. The interior cavities contained sealed foam-lined hard cases. Inside the cases, U.S. specification PVS-31 night vision binoculars, model variant conforming to military procurement standards, sealed, documented, classified under ITAR as controlled military optics, requiring a State Department export license for any international shipment. Not a single unit in that container had an export license. The controlled examination pulled 19 hollowed spools from the container. 72 NVG sets recovered at Gate 7, along with 14 thermal optics units carrying ATN product designations, also consistent with ITAR-controlled military hardware categories. The manifest listed the exporter as Castellano Marine Supplies, LLC, the parent company, Castellano Charter Group. Reyes submitted her field report at 11:48 p.m. that same night. She attached the chain of custody inventory, the weight discrepancy calculation, and a note observing that the concealment method indicated an engineered system rather than improvised smuggling. Custom hollowed industrial spools with precision foam inserts cut to optical case dimensions. This was manufactured infrastructure. Someone had sourced pre-hollowed spools or had access to a facility capable of producing them in volume. The assembly point was somewhere in the Castellano supply chain. The field report was routed to DSS Miami field office before 7 a.m. the following morning. The case was assigned to Special Agent Marcus Webb within 90 minutes of the report landing on the priority desk. Webb had worked export control violations and arms trafficking for 9 years. He had seen pharmaceutical covers, industrial component covers, agricultural shipment covers. The fishing supply cover was not new. What was new was the precision of the concealment engineering. The foam inserts were cut to exact optical case dimensions. The spool dimensions matched military optics transport case specifications with tolerances that could not be accidental. This was not a field modification done overnight in someone's garage. This was a designed manufacturing process. Webb's question in his initial case memo was simple. Who designed it and how many times had they run it before? I spent time going through the early case records on this file, and one detail kept coming back to me. The weight discrepancy was exactly 340 pounds, not a round number. Not an approximation, 340 pounds computed against a manifest that someone had clearly prepared with care. That means whoever packed that container was precise about everything except verifying the total weight certification at the end. They had engineered the concealment system correctly and then made one administrative miscalculation at the manifest stage. Or more likely, they had been running the system long enough that they had stopped verifying the arithmetic on what was, from their perspective, a routine shipment. That level of routine suggests earlier runs. This wasn't the first one. Webb requested a 6-month surveillance authorization. The court authorized 4 months. He began the investigation with a compressed window to build a case that, based on the engineering quality of the concealment he had seen at Gate 7, was almost certainly a multi-run operation already deep into its operational cycle. The Castellano Charter Group's legitimate operations were genuinely substantial. Roberto Castellano had built the business from 3 boats over 21 years. His son Marco, 38, was the current operations manager. The fleet serviced corporate deep-sea charters, tournament fishing events, and seasonal private bookings. Annual gross revenue between $1.2 and $1.9 million, according to corporate filings. No outstanding regulatory violations. No prior federal interactions beyond routine commercial CBP clearance. Castellano Marine Supplies, LLC, had been incorporated in 2021. Officially, it formalized the fleet's existing practice of sourcing and reselling surplus fishing equipment to other operators in the South Florida marine industry. The subsidiary used a licensed freight forwarder in Doral, Atlantico Cargo Solutions, for all outbound commercial consignments. Atlantico was a legitimate operation with a clean regulatory history stretching back years. Nothing in its public record suggested any connection to controlled hardware or federal interest. What interested Webb was the Castellano account specifically. The financial trace showed Atlantico had processed 47 outbound shipments for Castellano Marine Supplies in the 14 months preceding the November seizure. All 47 directed to the same Havana fishing supply distributor. That volume was unusually high for a small marine supply subsidiary with no documented retail or wholesale customers beyond the single Havana consignee. A normal fishing equipment resale business develops a diversified customer base. This one had one customer, one address in one city. 45 of those 47 shipments had cleared without secondary inspection. 2 had been flagged for primary routine examination and cleared at surface level without physical inspection of the cargo interior. The November 2025 Gate 7 seizure was the first time a Castellano marine consignment had been physically opened at secondary review. The arithmetic was stark. If even half of those 45 cleared shipments had carried comparable payload configurations, the volume of ITAR-controlled military hardware already outside the country was substantial. Webb couldn't verify the prior run volumes without the operational records. What he could do was map the current network and build the prosecution case. He identified 4 primary subjects: Roberto Castellano, the fleet patriarch and company founder; Marco Castellano, the operations manager; Ernesto Fuentes, 51, the fleet's dock supervisor at Watson Island for 7 years, whose name appeared in financial correspondence between Castellano Marine Supplies and Atlantico Cargo at unusual frequency for a dock operations employee; and Victor Almendros, 55, a Coral Gables resident identified in corporate records as a retired logistics consultant with no declared current employment, whose name appeared repeatedly in Castellano Marine Supply's internal financial communications and who had received 3 wire transfers from Castellano Marine Supply's accounts in the preceding calendar year, totaling $112,000. The surveillance logs began accumulating: vehicle patterns, meeting locations, financial transaction analysis. Between November 2025 and February 2026, DSS financial analysts traced $480,000 in inbound wire transfers to Castellano Marine Supplies from a series of shell companies registered in Panama and the Cayman Islands. The transfers came in irregular tranches: $11,400, $23,600, $18,800. Always fractionally below federal reporting thresholds. Always from entities with no traceable commercial activity. Paper companies whose only apparent function was to move money into the Castellano Supplies account. That kind of payment structuring is not accounting practice. It is financial counter-surveillance. Whoever designed the payment architecture had specific knowledge of U.S. bank reporting requirements and was deliberately engineering every transfer to pass below the automated flagging system. That level of discipline in the financial layer, combined with the manufacturing quality concealment in the physical layer, pointed to professional operational guidance, not improvised smuggling, a professionally supported supply network. 3 months into the surveillance, the investigation hit a wall. The Castellano Marine Supplies outbound shipment cycle had gone completely quiet after the November seizure. December. No outbound Castellano consignments through Atlantico Cargo. January, nothing. The network had recognized that one of its shipments had been intercepted and had shut down all outbound commercial activity. Webb noted in his operational log, a sophisticated operation monitors its own exposure. They knew one shipment had been flagged at the port of Miami. They didn't know how far the investigation had developed. They were waiting to see whether the seizure had triggered active surveillance or had been treated as an isolated customs fine. For 6 weeks, the pipeline was silent. Then in late January 2026, a new Castellano Marine consignment appeared in the Atlantico Cargo outbound queue. Different cargo description, different weight figures, accurate to within 5 pounds. Same Havana consignee. Webb's team flagged it for a controlled secondary examination through a coordinated CBP request documented as routine secondary selection, specifically to avoid signaling to the subjects that the examination was surveillance-driven. The examination found nothing. The manifest weight matched. The cargo on surface inspection was consistent with its description. The network had adapted. After the November seizure, whoever was managing the logistics had identified the weight discrepancy as the failure point and had adjusted the manifest weight figures on all subsequent shipments. New packages were prepared with accurate weight certifications. CBP inspectors relying on weight flags as the primary anomaly indicator would see nothing abnormal on any future Castellano Marine consignment. The border interdiction channel was closed to Webb's investigation. He could no longer track the operation through commercial shipping examination. He needed to follow the money and the communications, and he needed to find the assembly point, the physical location where the hollowed spools were being manufactured and the hardware was being loaded. That required deeper infrastructure surveillance, and it required time that the 4-month authorization window was consuming. In late February 2026, financial surveillance flagged a pattern that had not previously appeared in the investigation record. 3 cash payments totaling approximately $42,000 had been made from a Castellano Marine Supplies operating account to a Miami River logistics company called Southern Cross Marine Transport. The company's owner, David Chen, 41, a commercial maritime logistics contractor specializing in the movement of marine equipment between dry dock facilities and commercial port staging areas. No prior federal history, no connection to the Castellano fleet in any publicly filed commercial record. Webb applied for a tracking warrant. The court authorized GPS placement on 2 of Chen's company vehicles and a pen register on his primary business phone line. The GPS data produced the break. Chen's vehicles ran a pattern. Every 3rd Wednesday, a company van drove to a warehouse unit on Northwest 14th Street near the Miami River. The vehicle spent between 45 minutes and 2 hours inside. Then it drove directly to the Watson Island Marina. The warehouse was registered under a company name with no actual business record, a shell company created 8 months earlier. Webb applied for a warrant to place a pole surveillance camera on the exterior of the Northwest 14th Street warehouse. The warrant was authorized in early April 2026. Over the following 3 weeks, the camera documented 6 visits by Chen's vehicle, 2 visits by a vehicle registered to Fuentes, the dock supervisor, and 1 visit by a vehicle registered to Almendros. On 3 of the documented visits, Chen's van arrived at the warehouse empty and left loaded. The rear suspension was visibly compressed under cargo weight on departure. Each time the destination was the Watson Island Marina. The cargo was transferred directly onto Castellano fleet vessels at the dock, not to Atlantico Cargo Solutions, not to any commercial port staging area, directly onto the boats. Webb's team understood immediately what this meant. The Port of Miami commercial container channel through Atlantico Cargo was one export pipeline. The fleet vessels themselves were a second, parallel pipeline, moving product by sea rather than through commercial shipping documentation. Direct offshore transfers at rendezvous points, or staged delivery through secondary ports along the Florida Straits. 2 export channels coordinating through the same physical assembly operation on Northwest 14th Street, running simultaneously out of the same marina. The operation was not a single pipeline. It was 2 pipelines with shared logistics infrastructure and separate exposure surfaces. If one channel was disrupted, if a commercial container was opened at the port, the maritime channel continued operating independently. The November seizure had triggered a commercial shipping pause, but the maritime channel had not stopped. The boats had kept running. What strikes me now, looking back at the complete operational record, this 2-pipeline architecture had been running out of a single marina in one of the most commercially monitored maritime environments in the United States, without generating a single federal contact for an extended period. The Port of Miami Channel and the Maritime Channel were 2 separate risk surfaces, each with its own detection probability. Running both simultaneously created redundancy that any single interdiction event couldn't fully collapse. You don't build this kind of resilience by improvising. This came from someone who knew how to design a system that keeps running when pieces get hit. Webb convened an expanded surveillance coordination meeting in early April. The new target package now included the Northwest 14th Street warehouse as a primary evidence location. The surveillance timeline was running short. The 4-month authorization was expiring in weeks. And the investigation had not yet identified all the subjects involved in the Maritime Channel. In the first week of May 2026, the operational tempo from the subjects accelerated sharply. Chen's vehicle made 4 visits to the Northwest 14th Street warehouse in 5 consecutive days. The Watson Island Marina received cargo transfers from the warehouse on 3 of those days, distributed across multiple fleet vessels. And on May 5th, DSS Financial Surveillance flagged the largest single inbound wire transfer of the entire investigation period. $340,000 arriving to a Castellano Marine Supplies account from a Cayman Islands shell entity. The transfer was the clearest signal the investigation had produced. That volume, combined with the accelerated loading activity, indicated one thing: a major consolidated shipment was being staged. The operation was preparing for what appeared to be its most significant single run. Webb convened a joint operational briefing on May 8th at the DSS Miami field office. Attending DSS, CBP Port of Miami, ATF Miami Field Division, FBI Miami Field Office. The briefing covered the complete investigation record from November 2025 through the present date, the financial surveillance, the warehouse identification, the 2 pipeline architecture, the shell company payment history, the subject dossiers on all 4 primary targets and 7 additional subjects identified in the preceding 6 weeks, and the Defense Intelligence Agency assessment. That assessment had been classified above the warrant record level throughout the investigation, but its relevant conclusions were presentable at the joint briefing. The specific hardware configuration recovered at Gate 7, PVS-31 NVGs, ATN thermal imaging systems, Harris radio handsets at frequency variants consistent with DGI maritime unit operational ranges, represented a coherent procurement package for maritime surveillance operations. Not general-purpose security hardware, a design kit, designed for naval context use, consistent with documented procurement priorities for Cuban military maritime intelligence units as the Pentagon adjusted its regional force posture in the 18 months preceding the investigation. Webb's team had not been building an export control smuggling case. They had been building a national security case that happened to run through a fishing marina. The tactical recommendation at the May 8th briefing was unanimous. Move now. The operation was at or near maximum consolidated load. The $340,000 transfer, the accelerated loading pattern, and the maritime channel's current status all indicated a shipment departure was imminent. Days away, not weeks. Waiting further risked losing the product before it could be seized. Moving now would hit all 4 target locations: the marina, the warehouse, and the 3 residential properties within a single coordinated entry window. The operation was authorized for May 14, 2026. Pre-dawn, simultaneous across all 4 targets. Here's the thing that bothers me about this case. The Castellano network operated successfully for over a year inside one of the most heavily resourced commercial maritime screening environments in the United States, the Port of Miami, with its full CBP infrastructure, because the screening system is built for throughput efficiency, not for detecting low-volume, precisely calibrated concealment in a trusted shipper's commercial account. The November seizure didn't happen because the system caught a sophisticated operation. It happened because one inspector on one late shift ran the manifest arithmetic precisely on one container and got a number that didn't work. A different inspector, a different night, and that container clears. The network continues. The ledger adds another row. That is not a system functioning as designed. That is a system catching one operation by margin. The gap the Castellano network exploited was not an edge case. It was the baseline operating condition of commercial export screening at volume. What do you think? Does a case like this reflect a structural screening gap that needs a systemic fix? Or is this an acceptable error rate against the volume of commercial maritime traffic the Port of Miami handles every week? Leave that in the comments. The pre-raid logistics for an operation of this scale required 72 hours of coordinated planning to finalize. 148 agents across 4 federal agencies, 22 target vessels, each requiring a designated boarding team, 1 industrial warehouse with an ATF tactical breach element, 3 residential properties with DSS search teams. Maritime boarding elements operating in restricted harbor waters simultaneously with ground entry teams at 3 separate land-based locations 5 to 7 miles apart. The coordination complexity was significant. Webb maintained extreme compartmentalization on the full target package. The complete operational picture, all 4 target locations, all 22 vessel designations, the warehouse address, the residential property addresses, the subject identifiers, was restricted to a 7-person planning core until 36 hours before the entry window. Every other agent received only their individual assignment in the entry window time. No one outside the planning core held the complete picture before the final briefing. Put yourself in Webb's position. You have 148 agents who know they are executing a major federal operation on the morning of May 14th. And statistically, in any force of that size, there is a risk of an inadvertent disclosure, a call overheard, a conversation with a family member, a vehicle seen in an area it shouldn't be. The window between authorization and execution is always the most operationally dangerous period. Webb held the package tight until it was unavoidable to disclose. At 10 p.m. on May 13th, Webb convened the full-force final briefing at a secured facility in Opa-locka. All 148 agents in one room for the first time, full target disclosure, entry window, 5:22 a.m. The briefing lasted 40 minutes. Questions were minimal. The planning had been detailed enough that the picture was largely self-explanatory once the full package was disclosed. Then, at 11:40 p.m., something happened that nearly forced a delay. The DSS technical unit monitoring the Watson Island Marina surveillance feed, cameras positioned in the preceding 72 hours, picked up activity on the main dock. A figure, visible in night vision-capable footage, moving along the dock, carrying equipment, approaching one of the Castellano fleet vessels. For 17 minutes, the operations room at Opa-locka went silent. If someone was moving product off the fleet vessels in the middle of the night, if the operation had received a tip, or if the accelerated loading cycle had reached a trigger threshold where the subjects were repositioning the consolidated load to a secondary staging point, the morning's operation was in trouble. The maritime channel evidence would scatter before dawn. The product would be at sea before the boarding teams could move. The entire evidentiary foundation for the maritime pipeline charges would be compromised. Webb watched the surveillance feed and did not issue a standby order. At 11:47 p.m., the figure returned to the dock carrying the same equipment, set it on the dock, walked back to the vessel, came back out carrying a fishing rod holder, overnight gear inventory, a deck crew member doing routine maintenance and equipment organization between shifts. The operations room exhaled. The entry window held for 5:22 a.m. 5:22 a.m., May 14th, 2026. The operation commenced simultaneously across all 4 target locations. 4 CBP maritime vessels cut their running lights and reduced engine speed to near-silent approach from the Biscayne Bay side of Watson Island. The marina's seaward perimeter was the first entry vector. 22 agents in full tactical gear, each designated to a specific vessel by hull number, stepped off the CBP craft onto the Watson Island dock at 22 simultaneous positions across the marina's berth line. The timing was coordinated to prevent any vessel from casting off or making contact with other fleet members before all boarding positions were established. On the main dock, the figure in gray maintenance coveralls who had been standing near the varnish drum since 4:49 a.m. identified himself to the dockmaster, already in CBP custody at the harbor master's office since 5:24 a.m., and opened the dock access gate for the ground entry team. The maintenance cover had given the team an uncontested preposition inside the marina perimeter before the main entry force moved. The fleet's flagship vessel, the 58-foot sport fisher registered as Azul Caribe, was the primary evidence target. Pre-rate analysis had identified it as the most probable carrier of the largest consolidated load. Based on its size class relative to the rest of the fleet, the documented volume of cargo transfers to it from the Northwest 14th Street warehouse in the preceding 3 weeks, and the weight differential observed in the vehicle suspension footage from the warehouse surveillance camera. The Azul Caribe boarding team entered at 5:28 a.m. The main hold inspection ran 11 minutes. Beneath the forward deck flooring, 4 composite access panels installed on recessed hinges designed to blend with the deck surface texture, not referenced in any vessel inspection record on file with Florida Fish and Wildlife. Agents found 80 NVG and thermal optics units, sealed in foam-cut hard cases identical in construction to those recovered at Gate 7 in November 2025. Adjacent to the optics cases, 6 Harris brand radio handsets, model variant consistent with frequency ranges associated with Cuban DGI maritime unit communications protocols, as identified in the DIA technical assessment. On the remaining 21 vessels, boarding teams located additional units in distributed configurations. Smaller quantities per vessel, 14 sets on one boat, 11 on another, 9 and 7 on 2 others further down the berth line. The distribution pattern was deliberate architecture. Spreading the inventory across the full fleet reduced exposure from any single vessel interception. A maritime interdiction that caught one vessel at sea would recover a fraction of the consolidated load. The full payload was protected through distribution. Fleet-wide inventory completed through chain of custody documentation by 9:20 a.m. 340 units recovered across 22 vessels. Simultaneously with the marina operations, the ATF tactical team executed the search warrant at the Northwest 14th Street warehouse at 5:22 a.m. The breach was completed in under 30 seconds. Inside, a fabrication and assembly operation, industrial cutting equipment, foam insert templating jigs calibrated to specific military optics case dimensions, a production line with dozens of completed hollowed monofilament spools staged for loading, another 40 plus in various stages of partial assembly. Commercial packaging materials, a heat sealer for shrink wrap finishing, a filing cabinet containing printed consignment manifests for the Atlantico cargo shipment history, cross-referenced against a coded accounting ledger. The accounting ledger was the key document of the entire operation. DSS forensic accountants spent 11 days on the ledger. It used a modified double-entry accounting format with commodity code substitutions in place of product identifiers. A notation system designed to be illegible to anyone without the substitution key. When decoded, the ledger documented 14 prior completed shipment cycles. Each entry recorded the consignment volume, the transit routing designation, the receiving handler identifier, and the payment received. The cycles were dated. The earliest documented run predated the investigation by more than a year. 14 runs. Volume per cycle ranging from 28 to 36 units. The arithmetic. Before the November 2025 Gate 7 seizure, more than 300 units of U.S. specification military night vision hardware had already left the country through the Castellano network. 300 units. Already in Cuba, already in the hands of Cuban DGI maritime operatives or in transit to them, already outside the reach of any federal forfeiture proceeding. Simultaneously with the marina and warehouse operations, DSS search teams executed warrants at 3 Coral Gables residential properties: Roberto Castellano's primary residence, Victor Almendros' home, and a third property associated with a logistics subject who had been identified in the final 2 weeks of surveillance. The searches ran from 5:22 a.m. through approximately noon. Cash recovered across the 3 properties, $4.8 million. Distributed in amounts consistent with staged emergency liquidity, the kind of cash allocation that indicates preparation for the possibility of one location being compromised while preserving access to resources across multiple separate sites. At Roberto Castellano's residence, an encrypted laptop containing financial correspondence with Havana-side handler contacts, a printed schedule of projected future shipment cycles extending through August 2026, and a handwritten financial log cross-referencing Castellano Marine Supply's deposit records against the coded ledger entries recovered from the warehouse. There is a line in recovered correspondence from Castellano's residence, a letter drafted but apparently not sent to a Havana-side contact, that looking at it now is hard to read without noting what it reveals about the operation's self-perception. Castellano had written that the network had proceeded with a discretion that would surprise anyone who knew Miami. He wasn't wrong. For over a year in one of the most commercially monitored port environments in the United States, the pipeline had moved controlled military hardware without generating a single federal response. That's not a statement about Castellano's operational skill. It's a statement about the structural gap his network identified and exploited consistently until one inspector ran her arithmetic with unusual precision on one November night. 12 individuals were arrested in the May 14th operations: Roberto Castellano, Marco Castellano, Ernesto Fuentes, Victor Almendros, David Chen, and 7 additional subjects identified through financial and communication surveillance during the investigation: couriers, financial processing contacts, and logistics personnel whose specific roles had become clear in the final weeks before the raid. All 12 held without bail pending federal arraignment. The charges filed in the Southern District of Florida: violations of the Arms Export Control Act, conspiracy to export ITAR-controlled military hardware without a license, conspiracy to provide material support to a foreign intelligence service, and federal money laundering charges connected to the Shell Company payment structure. The initial indictment was filed under seal on May 15 and unsealed the morning of May 16. What the indictment did not include, what federal prosecutors did not charge in the initial filing, was a direct espionage count against Roberto Castellano. The evidence established that he had been the primary organizer of the smuggling infrastructure. It did not establish, at the evidentiary standard required for an espionage charge under federal statute, that he had acted as a registered agent of the Cuban DGI rather than as a commercial supplier aware that his buyers were government-affiliated. That distinction between supplying a foreign government entity and acting as its operational agent determines the maximum sentence exposure on the principal count. And it is a distinction that defense counsel in the Southern District of Florida will have substantial time and resources to exploit. One of the 12 arrested cooperated. The deal covered the money trail and domestic communications, but not the Havana handlers. They're outside U.S. reach. The DSS forensic accounting documented $7.3 million in total payments to the Castellano network across the 14 completed cycles documented in the decoded ledger. $4.8 million recovered in cash from the 3 residential properties. $2.5 million is unaccounted for in the recovered documentation, either distributed to locations not yet identified, moved offshore before the raid date, or held in financial instruments that the investigation has not yet fully traced. $2.5 million. Not recovered. Location unknown as of this reporting. One detail from this case that has stayed with me. The Defense Intelligence Agency assessment described the specific hardware configuration, the PVS-31 NVGs, the ATN thermal systems, the Harris radio variants, as a coherent maritime surveillance and operations package. Designed, not assembled from whatever was available. Someone specified exactly what to procure, the PVS-31 model rather than a civilian market equivalent, the specific Harris radio variants rather than commercially available alternatives. That specification required knowledge of DGI maritime unit requirements and U.S. export control category structures. The 12 individuals arrested on May 14th were the supply chain, the logistics, the maritime transport, the financial distribution network. Whoever specified what to buy, whoever designed the procurement requirements and coordinated the delivery protocols on the Havana side, does not appear in any of the 12 defendant files. That thread is in the investigation record. It is not in the indictment. The Castellano fleet is in civil asset forfeiture proceedings. All 22 vessels. The Watson Island Marina berths are vacant. The Northwest 14th Street warehouse is padlocked under ATF administrative order. Castellano Marine Supplies, LLC's export license was suspended by the State Department on the date of the raid. The Cuban-American Sport Fishing Classic, the annual tournament the Castellano fleet had sponsored for 11 consecutive years, is scheduled for July 2026. As of this reporting, it has no named sponsor. More than 300 units of U.S. specification military night vision hardware are in Cuba. They were not recovered in the May 14th operation. They cannot be recovered through federal forfeiture proceedings. They are where they were sent. The network is dismantled. The capability requirement that drove 412 sets of military optics and $7.3 million in shadow payments to a fishing operation on Biscayne Bay, that requirement exists independent of the Castellano family. It existed before Roberto Castellano received the first transfer. It will exist after the Southern District of Florida closes his case. One inspector, one manifest calculation, one number that didn't work. Subscribe and you'll be there when the next file opens.